Matthew 10:26 through 33. Therefore, do not fear them, for there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be known. Whatever I tell you in dark, speak in light, and what you hear in the ear, preach on the housetops. And do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin, and not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will? But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Do not fear, therefore you are of more value than any sparrows. Therefore, whoever confesses me before men, him I will also confess before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, him I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. This is the word of the Lord.
When I was in seminary, when we were our last year of seminary, when we were graduating, I was thinking about this when I was thinking about graduations. And Dustin and Marlinda can be grateful for this. We had to take psychiatric evaluations, like 3 days worth. And I had never done this before, but it's a really, really annoying process because basically they ask you the same questions over and over and over again to see if you'll flip out. That seems to be the gist of it. And of course we teased each other mercilessly about how we were going to fail, right? And much to our glee, my friend Marty was called back. So we all the rest of us got a thumbs up, and we all got sent on our way, and Marty was called back, and they told him they wanted to arrange some counseling sessions, which is, I mean, hey, look, sometimes people need some help, right? No shame there. But he asked, what was it that seemed to be a problem? And they said, well, he had scored very high on various measures of paranoia. Well, it turns out one of the questions that we were asked over and over again was, do you dread the thought of, and then there were like earthquakes, tornadoes, tsunamis, that sort of thing. The right answer was no. But Marty, he thought about it too much, and he said, wow, earthquakes, they kill lots of people. They're really, really bad. So, yeah, sure. I mean, you should dread that, shouldn't you? And so he answered yes to all those questions. And he had to take all the tests again before he was approved. So I have no idea why an unreasonable fear of earthquakes might prevent a person from preaching the gospel. I guess maybe if you live in Southern California or somewhere. But I don't know. But I do know this, that an unreasonable fear of men will prevent you from preaching the gospel. Right? Last week we read the beginning of Matthew chapter 10, how Jesus called his disciples to himself, right? How it kind of a raggedy bunch too, slightly disreputable. How he equipped them, giving them, Matthew says, authority over unclean spirits and authority to heal every disease and affliction, and how he sent them out into the world, right? To proclaim this message that he gave them. It wasn't a nice, friendly world either. It was not a nice, friendly world that he sent them out into. He said that some people would receive them gladly, right? And hear their message, which was that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. But many people wouldn't receive them. And he warned them in the future it would get even worse. He said that they would be delivered over to courts and flogged in synagogues, dragged before governors and kings, that brother would rise against brother and parents against their children, that they would incur the hatred of the world for his sake. The old order of the world is not about to go quietly into the night. The devil does not relinquish his kingdom without a struggle. That was the warning, right? And he told them the proper response to persecution, the proper response to rejection is not to get angry. It's not to despair. It's to keep going. It's to keep going. Keep moving forward. Shake the dust from your feet, he said, verse 14. When they persecute you in one town, flee to the next. Where, by the way, you're supposed to preach the gospel again and possibly get kicked out again. But you keep going, right? Keep moving. The message that the disciples were carrying, and remember, they were carrying it to whom? To the world at large? They were carrying it to the lost sheep of Israel. The message that the disciples were carrying was too important to hesitate, even in the face of persecution, right? Think about this. Not only had the prayers of the people of God been answered, right? They had been praying for 2,000 years or more for the Messiah who had been promised to them. And here Jesus was, right? Here he was, the fulfillment of their hopes and their dreams and their prayers. Here was the Lord. Here was the God of Israel in human flesh living down the road. That by itself should have caused them to drop whatever they were doing and to run down there. Wouldn't you? You would hope, right? I mean, well, let's be honest. No, you wouldn't. I wouldn't either, because that's human nature. But you would hope you would. But they were also going out. The other reason this message was that important, though, it's not just that the Messiah had come. It was that their fate, whether they would stand or fall on the day of judgment, was directly tied to how they received the message. Right? Jesus says, verse 15, those who reject it, he says it'll be more bearable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for that town. And it's not going to be nice for Sodom and Gomorrah, just for the record. The stakes were that high. The stakes are still that high. That's what we're dealing in. This is not a little play that we do once a week, right? This is life and death. Eternal life and death. Now we have the promise here that Jesus promised that the gates of hell, in spite of all this persecution, this rejection, all these things, Jesus promised that the gates of hell will not prevail against his church, right? Laws cannot prevent the preaching of the gospel. Witness Saudi Arabia. It's simply illegal to be a public Christian in Saudi Arabia. They will not fine you for praying silently to yourself, but they will arrest you for getting together with anybody else. You cannot carry a Bible into Saudi Arabia. They are not permitted in the country. If you're wearing a little cross necklace, ladies, you're not getting in. They actually have a shredder at the airport. Now, that's just evil. I'm sorry. They have a Bible shredder at the airport. Just realized I was talking into my water, and I'm going to take a drink from my microphone. I'm not used to holding this thing. Yeah, they have a Bible shredder. Guess what, though? The church in Saudi Arabia is growing. And it's growing very quickly. It's still small. Don't expect to go to Saudi Arabia and find a whole bunch of Christians. It's still very small, but it's growing very quickly. The laws cannot prevent it. Bloody persecution cannot prevent the preaching of the gospel. You ever hear the Boxer Rebellion? China? About 120 years ago. 120 years ago, there was a rebellion. And largely it was a rebellion against European colonialism. But the thing is that the rebels associated Christianity with the colonizers, and they murdered thousands of missionaries. They murdered tens of thousands of Chinese Christians. Their goal was to wipe Christianity out of China. There are better than 100 million Chinese Christians today. Guess what? Didn't work. It's not going to work. Jesus promised the gates of hell shall not prevail against his church. Laws, bloody persecution, they can't prevent the preaching of the gospel. In fact, there's really one thing that effectively prevents the preaching of the gospel. You know what it is? Yes, us. That's right. It's fear. It's fear. It's fear. Often simply the fear of rejection. Simply the fear of rejection. It's fear often that keeps us from sharing the most important message that anyone will ever hear from us. I'm going to start a line of Calvinist greeting cards that are going to tell the truth. I get so mad at greeting cards. I went to buy graduation cards yesterday, and I was trying to find one that was, I'm sorry, Marlinda, I tried to find one that told the truth, right? Which, and all of them are like, you're the most special person who's ever lived. My thought is, no, you're not. No offense. Oh, no, she's here. I'm sorry. But, you know, they're all these cards, like birthday cards. I bought a birthday card for my nephew. Like, sorry, I don't think you're like, you should. The other funny thing is the greeting cards, the graduation cards that give terrible advice. Like, so many of them are like, follow your heart wherever it leads. I think, no, that's bad advice. Your heart will mislead you. So my wife and I were joking that I'm going to start my own line of Calvinist greeting cards. The graduation cards are going to say, congratulations, now get a job. Where was I? Yeah, this fear of rejection, it keeps us from sharing the most important message that anyone will ever hear. We tell people all these other things, but we're afraid to tell them. Oh, I know what I was talking about. I lost my train of thought. Yeah, I picked up a greeting card that said, the most important words you'll ever hear are, I love you. And I disagree. The most important words you'll ever hear is that God loves you. That's the most important message we have for people, that God loves them, that they're not alone, that their life has purpose and meaning, eternal purpose, that they're not just wandering through life, stumbling from this to that. This is the message we have for them, right? That God so loves them that he gave his only begotten Son. And fear prevents us from sharing that. It's fear of causing offense that keeps us from warning people we know and we care about the danger of unrepentant sin. I love you all. Well, some of you. You can leave it to you to figure out who. That can't prevent me from telling you the truth, even if it hurts. Because I've got to warn you. That's my job. And it's not just my job. If I care about you in the slightest, I've got to warn you. It's fear. It's the fear of losing members. It's the fear of losing donations or losing the respect of the world, coupled with a lack of confidence in the Word of God, that leads preachers to avoid hard texts. What do I mean hard texts? I mean skipping through the Bible and only preaching the happy, uplifting stuff. You know what? The whole book is the Word of God. And I am not doing you favors by leaving stuff out. But I can tell you, I'll be straight up honest. It is tempting. It is badly tempting to look at something that's confusing and seems like it would offend people and say, no, I'm going to skip that. It's fear. Right? It's fear of personal discomfort that prevents Christians from reaching out to those people. Whoever those people might be. the homeless, people who are struggling with addiction, people who are caught up in especially disreputable sins. In other words, exactly the sort of people who desperately need it. Now, I want to add a disclaimer here. I am convinced that in the end, that there is nothing, even our disobedience cannot derail the kingdom of God, right? Cannot derail the purposes of a sovereign God. Those whom he has chosen, he will call to himself one way or another, if not through me, then through somebody else. I do believe that. Andy Scott's failure to preach the gospel with power and authority it cannot somehow undo the election of sinners to eternal life in Jesus Christ. That was a decision that was made according to Ephesians 1 verse 5 before the foundation of the world. And I am incredibly grateful because I'm not doing such an awesome job at the moment. But that doesn't change the fact that this is what I'm called to do. Believing that God will accomplish his will one way or another doesn't change the fact that he's commanding me to bear witness right here and right now, right? It's something upon, and to fail to do that is disobedience to God. It's something that I'm going to have to answer for. So what's stopping us? Well, laziness, maybe. Lack of confidence, but I think above all else, fear. Fear stops us. Which is why verses 26 to 33 here, this is a shot in the arm. This is a shot in the arm, and actually I could probably skip the rest of my sermon. I'm glad that it encourages me that you saw the same 3 encouragements there that I did, because that means that we're reading the same word, right? Absolutely. But he does. He gives 3 reasons here. Jesus gives 3 reasons why we should not be afraid of them. Right? Have no fear of them, he says. And who is he referring to? He's referring to the people mentioned earlier, those who will not receive the truth of the gospel, who would hurt and destroy and persecute rather than allow Jesus to be preached. It says, have no fear of them. Why not? Well, first, because in the end, lies are shown for what they are. Right? He says, for nothing is covered that will not be revealed, verse 26, or hidden that will not be known. Nothing is covered that will not be revealed. Now, this applies to the persecutors in part. It is easy to look at the world, is it not? And wonder why we should have to endure hardship when some obviously, blatantly, we think, wicked people seem to be getting away with it. Right? You ever read the 73rd Psalm? Surely God is good to Israel, to all the upright in heart, but as for me, my feet had almost slipped, for I envied the arrogant. Right? And the psalmist goes on to talk about how, hey, they have no troubles. They're not hungry. They're not persecuted. They're not, look at them. They seem to be getting away with it. And he goes and he says that I stood in your sanctuary, in the sanctuary of the Lord, and he saw their end. He saw that their feet are planted on slippery ground. In other words, you can look at people and say, wow, they seem to be getting away with that. How are they getting away with that? How does God not smite them dead right now? And the answer is, the day is coming. It's coming. Be patient. Be patient. Nothing is covered that will not be revealed. It applies to the disciples themselves. It applies to us, right? I have a theory, and my theory is that in the end, everyone winds up naked. And that you should just get used to it now. It's true. See, the funny thing is that when I tell people this, women all agree. They're all like, yeah, because women's health care is humiliating in the extreme. But I really feel for you ladies. But, you talk to people, they have surgery or whatever, or they get into an accident, and some guy cuts your pants off with a pair of scissors. Sooner or later, you wind up naked in public, and you might as well get used to it. Get that off your back. It applies to our sins, too, People go to such great lengths to put up a good front. They go to such great lengths to look good in front of the world. I'm not suggesting you should broadcast your sins. Please don't. I'm simply suggesting that you ought not to hide them either, but just be honest. Be honest about who you are. Look, I know who you are. You're a sinner who has been redeemed by the blood of Jesus. You're not fooling me. I'm not fooling you, I hope. Put on a tie and you look good, I guess. If we are sending the world the message that Christians are morally superior, a single failure is going to bring the whole enterprise down. That's what public scandal does. More importantly here, though, this applies to the truth of the gospel message. It's ultimately vindicated, not by our apologetics, not by our experience, although those things are good and valuable. Ultimately, the truth of the gospel message is vindicated by God on the day of judgment. That's the real proof. You know who wins. You've read the end of the book. So Jesus says, shout the gospel from the rooftops. Live it out in the sight of the world. You shouldn't be afraid of them. Bless you. You shouldn't be afraid of them, as Mickey said, because the worst they can do is kill you. That's what he says in verse 28. The worst they can do is kill you. Do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both body and soul in hell. There is nothing, and this is really, really important, there's nothing anybody can take from you. There is nothing that anybody can take from a Christian that will not be restored 100-fold in the kingdom of heaven, period. They can take your life, they can take your stuff, they can take your family, all of it. All of it will be restored, period. And finally here, verses 29 to 31, remember that God is sovereign over every single facet of creation. God is sovereign over every single facet of creation. Things may happen that are against his will. We call that sin, right? Things may happen that are against his will, but nothing happens apart from his will. That may sound like a fine distinction, but it's really, really, really important because it means that there is no area. You're never going to find yourself in a situation in life where there's nothing he can do about it, where he didn't see that coming. Never are you going to get in a scrape that's so bad that the Lord shrugs and says, sorry, can't help you. Never are you going to surprise him. God is sovereign over every single facet of creation. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father, but even the hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore. You are of more value than many sparrows. I've always thought, wow, that's not exactly a great encouragement. I'm worth more than a bunch of sparrows, but the point is, the Lord, he sees, right? He sees every single sparrow that falls to the ground, right? He knows the number of hairs on your head. There is nothing that could happen apart from his will. Now, when people say that, sometimes they're accused of fatalism, right? Fatalism, the idea that, well, whatever happens will happen, que sera, sera, might as well sit back and enjoy it. But that's not what confidence in the sovereignty of God does to people who understand it. What it does is it creates courage. Give you an example. Stonewall Jackson, Thomas Jackson. Stonewall Jackson, Confederate general. Not a fan of the Confederacy myself, but Stonewall Jackson, he acquired his nickname depending on actually which battle it was, depends on who you read, but he acquired his nickname for basically standing erect and inert in battle, for holding a position where anyone else would have broken and run. And he explained later, he said, by the way, Presbyterian, Sunday school teacher. He said, "My religious beliefs teach me to feel as safe in battle as in bed. God has fixed the time of my death. I do not concern myself with that, but to be always ready whenever it may overtake me. That is the way all men should live, and all men would be equally brave." Stonewall Jackson, my favorite West Virginian. He's buried down by Elkins, or his arm is anyway. So have no fear of them. Have no fear of them. And of course, finally, there's the warning, right? That if you confess Jesus before men, he will confess you before his Father in heaven. If you don't, he won't. Do you want him to confess you before his Father in heaven? I think you do. What's going to stop you? Only one thing. It's fear. But have no fear of them. Have no fear of them. Whatever is hidden, it's going to be revealed. Whatever is hidden is going to be revealed. The worst they can do is kill you. And your Father in heaven knows all of it ahead of time. So have courage. Shout it from the housetops. Live the gospel out in love and service for the people of God. Share with people the most important thing they'll ever hear. Amen.